Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Morales, and I will be chairing today's fourth and last webinar of the Policy Dialogue series of the Cost Action Ethmigsurveydata. And we are very excited to have today a very interesting panel and group of presenters that will be giving us a number of very insightful presentation on various surveys that help us to understand asylum-related migration. As usual, we will have the presentations in a row, and then we will have some time for the questions and answers and discussion. Because today's seminar will be joined by a smaller number of people, I anticipate that we can have a much livelier debate and discussion. I'm very pleased to present to you three speakers that will be joining today. Sara Enriquez, who is a research officer at the European Asylum Support Office, and she will be presenting the SAM project, Surveys to Understand Asylum-Related Migration, which is a project coordinated by EASO, the European Asylum Support Office. Mariana Yanila Sala Blanco, who is an assistant professor of political science at Arizona State University, and she will be presenting her work around the Syrian refugee panel study that she's been carrying out since 2017, and she will be presenting some preliminary findings. And last but not least, Yulia Kosyakova, who is a senior researcher at the German Institute for Employment Research, and who will be presenting work on the integration of refugees in Germany based on some results that are extracted from the IAB BMF SOEP survey of refugees. So without further ado, I leave the air and the airwaves to Sara Enriquez from the European Asylum Support Office, who will be presenting this very interesting project led by EASO. Sara, please.
So let me just share the screen, share the slides. If you can please just let me know when you are able to see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Another aspect that I just would like to ask is that my internet connection is not the best. So if you have had any problems listening to me, please let me know as soon as possible. Okay. Okay, so first of all, before starting, I would like to thank Laura and Marcelo for inviting us to participate in this seminar. We are happy to have this opportunity to present our project. That is a project that has been that we have been working on for some time now, and we are happy to be here and to present some of the work we have done. My name is Sara Enriquez, as Laura already mentioned, and so I'm going to present to you the SAM project, like we call it, the Surveys to Understand Asylum-Related Migration. Before I go into more details about the project, I would like just to talk a little bit about who we are and what we do. So EASO is the European Asylum Support Office. It's an EU agency specialized in asylum knowledge that contributes to the development and implementation of the common European asylum system. It basically coordinates practical cooperation among member states on many aspects relating asylum. More particularly, this project is developed by the EASO research team, which is part of the data analysis and research sector. Our team focuses on developing research projects to better understand asylum data and complement other more established monitoring tools, of course, with the final aim of better understanding asylum-related migration and contribute to a more efficient asylum system in Europe. Okay, so our sector collects data in various different ways that feed up several different databases. The EPS databases is an example, is the Early Warning Preparedness System database that collects data on relevant indicators in all key stages of the common European asylum system. For instance, the data on the number of applications lodged, the stock of people in reception centers, the decisions on applications, withdrawn applications, pending cases, etc. And this data is collected monthly, and 15 days after the reference periods, all EU plus countries send this data to EASO using this system. And this data comes directly from national asylum authorities in member states. However, EASO is always looking for more ways to complement the data collected and to offer better and more precise insights on the situation of asylum in Europe. And some projects, so the survey project that I'm going to present today is an example of this, of a complementary tool, a new system to collect data to feed up this EPS database with more information, but this time in a different way. We intend to collect data directly from the asylum seekers and not from the national authorities. And you could ask me, but why surveys? And of course, there is a multitude of ways that we can collect data. And we do have other ongoing projects, ongoing research projects that focus on big data or forecast modeling, for instance, but surveys are an excellent tool to collect data directly from asylum seekers and to answer gaps in knowledge that we cannot access with data collected in different ways, and to offer more detailed data on migrants' journey, their expectations, their onward traveling intentions, etc. Also, surveys allow anonymity, which may improve the report of sensitive data. Asylum seekers may feel more comfortable revealing their opinions if they identify, if their identity is concealed, if they are not talking directly with authorities that may have an impact on their asylum application and their asylum decision. Also, the asylum situation is a dynamic and a constantly changing situation. And therefore, a more permanent system of data collection can offer better insights instead of any other cross-sectional data that we could collect. And lastly, surveys allow to research large samples that can be representative if we do use the correct methods for that, and that have lower costs and in a less time-consuming or maybe a resource-consuming way, which is one of the main goals of this project. So, briefly explaining, SAM is a research project that intends to set up a permanent system of data collection directly from asylum seekers across EU plus countries, using surveys conducted within reception centers in each member state. The main goal of the project is to test technical and logistical aspects related to setting up and implementing a large-scale multi-country survey, to test the feasibility of surveying a large number of asylum seekers at EU reception centers, and to explore different methodologies, procedures, strategies for setting up this system and conducting the surveys. In a preparatory phase, the project started in 2017 with a call for tender and award for a literature review on a feasibility study that were conducted later in 2018. On 2019, EASO launched a new call for tender to conduct the pilot survey itself. Several research materials were prepared and developed, and finally in 2020, the project was ready to be launched in 3 member states, so Belgium, France, and Norway. The main goal of this first study, so the literature review on surveys with asylum-related migrants, was to review the research designs and methodologies adopted in previous studies developed, identifying advantage and, of course, disadvantage of using surveys to research this audience. The review identified 157 surveys with asylum seekers published between 2000 and 2017. The majority of these surveys was a single country survey, so only 24% were multi-country surveys like our project. A common limitation that was identified by the majority of the studies was lack of accurate sampling frames, mainly because asylum seekers are not registered in population databases, as we know. And of course, this resulted in a more predominant use of non-probability sampling methods, such as snowball and purposive samplings. Regarding modes of administration, this study indicated that face-to-face interviews are the preferred technique to conduct surveys with this audience. However, some studies also use mixed designs, combining different techniques to reach more respondents. And of course, it is important that questionnaires are translated into refugees and asylum seekers' native-speaking languages to reduce bias and increase response rates. And lastly, this study also highlighted the relevance of having a pilot phase to test possible challenges of conducting a kind of survey like this one and provide useful recommendations. So while the outcomes of the literature review informed the general design of the project, it was still essential to understand whether the implementation of this project in reception centers across European countries would be feasible. And indeed, in this case, the feasibility of the study depends much on the level of cooperation of national asylum authorities in each member state, because we are dealing with hard-to-reach population and we will need their support to be able to conduct the survey. So EASO conducted also a feasibility study among national asylum authorities to explore their potential interest in participating in the study and to explore some specific features of the field in the reception systems, in reception centers that are relevant to conduct the survey. So this study was conducted in two main phases. So a first phase with a short query asking national asylum authorities their potential interest in participating in the project. And a second questionnaire asking more specific features of how reception centers work and how we can contact asylum-related migrants residents in those reception centers. So based on the results of the previous studies, a pilot study was developed that intended to conduct face-to-face interviews by native speakers in English, French, Arabic, and Dari in reception centers in France, Belgium, and Norway. The target population were adult third country nationals or stateless people who were first-time asylum applicants and beneficiaries of international protection. The survey aimed for a sample size of around 2,000 respondents in these three countries, and it identifies some main challenges such as how to research hard-to-reach population, how to deal with high turnover of individuals in the reception centers, and how best to obtain a representative sample in these conditions, and how to access and analyze the internal validity of the data that we will collect, etc. However, in 2020, as we all know, when our team was finally ready to launch the pilot study in these countries, COVID-19 pandemic appeared and the study was interrupted, mainly due to COVID restrictions across the different European countries and mainly within the reception centers, such as social distancing and of course a face-to-face study in which we were going to the place, to the reception centers with the professional interviewings, speaking in native language, etc., was no longer possible to conduct. So the research team had to rethink alternative approaches to the study and consider different options to move forward. And the change to an online version, a survey online version, was considered the best way forward. So the study was adapted, and we developed what we call the SUM2 project, which is mainly the same project but adapted to the online world. So the SUM2 is still a multi-country project that intends to survey a representative sample of asylum-related migrants across the different EU countries, but now taking advantage of the online world and all the affordances that it offers. The survey will be distributed using online. The survey will be distributed using a survey software, and of course will be voluntary, anonymous, and will be self-administered by the migrants, the residents in the several different reception centers, using their own smartphone and the Wi-Fi that is accessible in the reception centers. And still will be translated in several different languages of the top countries of origin in each member state. So the SUM2 project is divided into three main stages: a preparatory stage, a preparatory stage, so a pilot stage, and a system, what we call the system develop stage. The preparatory phase is a phase in which the project systematizes all the knowledge gained in the previous SUM project, so the lessons learned from the first project, and plans for a scoping review and a survey to national reception authorities, again, on their interest and willingness this time to conduct or to allow the conduction of an online survey in their reception centers. The pilot phase is the second stage of the project and is what we call an in-house study that is conducted in EU countries where EASO deploys operational teams. So here we'll take some advantage from our support teams in the different reception centers across Europe. This study intends to test the feasibility and also to analyze the best survey distribution strategies and best sample recruitment strategies to conduct the survey. The final stage is the system development stage, in which we aim for a representative sample and for the implementation of the online survey across the EU plus countries in a more systematic and permanent way. So I'm going to present some of we are now in the pilot phase of the project, and I'm going to present to you some of the results that we have from the preparatory phase. Okay, so in the preparatory phase, we conducted a survey with the national asylum authorities that was distributed through our internal network groups. The main goal was to explore whether reception centers have used before online surveys with asylum-related migrants and to understand the best practice on how to conduct these surveys. It was conducted between November 9 and December 4, and we got answers from 17 reception centers. The results indicate that only a few have already used online surveys with residents, so it's not a common technique that they use, and that the main communication tools to distribute their surveys on online surveys were SMS or SMS through WhatsApp application. The majority of the reception centers believe that conducting an online survey in their reception centers is feasible and realistic, and they are interested in supporting the project and available to conduct the surveys within their reception centers. They say that they can use posters, flyers, and a link in their own web pages, and some mentioned that they could be available to share it using email and SMS. 14 member states from the 16 identified state that they are interested in joining the project and having the survey running in their reception centers. And we also analyzed some of the main topics that reception centers authorities would be interested in exploring in a survey. And these are expectations and reasons, reasons for selecting specific countries of destinations, socioeconomic factors, among other factors. So still as part of the preparatory phase, we also conducted a systematic literature review that is a scoping review because it also uses, it follows a specific methodology. And the idea was to explore the best scientific evidence on research on asylum-related migration using online surveys. And our goal was to identify existing recent studies that surveyed asylum-related migrants or using online surveys, and to review the main methodological aspects that these studies used to better inform our project, of course. Wait. Okay. So we were able to identify 18 studies published between 2017 and 2020 that follow our eligibility criteria. The sample in these studies was mainly constituted by asylum-related migrants that were first-generation migrants and already beneficiaries of international protection living in host countries. The sample size varied widely, and once again, the common sample. Once again, it was more used non-probabilistic samples, so no representative samples. The main topics of interest addressed in these studies were social integration and mental health. Some studies applied mixed methods approach again, so trying like conducting not only the online survey, but also conducting, for instance, an interviews or focus groups or other techniques to collect data. Regarding recruitment, some used mixed strategies as well, involving organizations working in the field of asylum, community members, social media, posters, flyers, web pages, etc. And of course, when possible, population registry and contact numbers. The survey was distributed using links and QR codes, and many studies had the support of official organizations working in the field of asylum that were able to distribute the survey to migrants by personal contacts. Close-ended questions were the most common in the questionnaires, and of course, language and translation was considered a key feature for the success of the survey, allowing the target population to read and answer in their own language. Some of the however, some questions that we had still remain to answer after our preparatory phase, calling for more research. For instance, we were not able to find a consensus on the more appropriate length for an online survey with asylum seekers. Or what are the more effective distribution strategies to foster response rate, which of course is one of our main concerns going to reception centers and distributing an online survey for migrants to voluntarily access it and answer it. Also, the literature was not clear about the impact of using incentives, for instance, and the impact of branding the survey. And therefore, we decided to further explore these aspects on our next stage, our pilot study. We are now in this stage of the project. As I explained, we call it in-house study because we are using the support of our operational teams that are deployed in this reception center supporting asylum applications. So we will be conducting this pilot in Greece, Italy, Malta, and Cyprus. And it is also divided in two main phases, an exploratory and an experimental phase. The main goal of the study is to test the feasibility of conducting online surveys with asylum-related migrants and to test the best distribution and sample recruitment strategies to promote response rates. The pilots will be conducted in two phases. And maybe I will show the next slide. Yes, so the first phase is a phase that intends mainly to test the feasibility of conducting online surveys with residents in reception centers. And this feasibility testing includes as well analyzing the software, survey software, fieldwork, population characteristics understanding, analyzing, testing the questionnaire itself, and testing how to analyze data and how to report data. The second phase of this pilot stage, we intend to apply quasi-experimental research design with a 3x2 factorial design, in which we'll have 6 treatment groups. Our independent variables here are the incentives, the length of the survey, and the distribution strategies. And what we intend to understand is what is the impact of these variables in response rates and in the dropout rates. Being that our intention, of course, is to promote response rate to our questionnaire. So we'll have these 3 groups: a control group, in which the survey will be distributed mainly by posters and flyers inside reception centers. A second grouping that we will use incentives to promote response rate, of course. And the third group that we will apply some distribution strategies. We plan to involve, for instance, community leaders, handling, for instance, flyers and word of mouth that the survey is taking place, and maybe involve other organizations working in the field of asylum in those reception centers to also publicize the survey, etc. And we'll try to understand what is the impact of each of these strategies to promote the response to our questionnaire. And of course, we will inform our next steps in the project based on the results that we'll find here. Our sample selection will be based on voluntary response, so it's a self-selected participants. And of course, we do not target any specific sample size on this phase because it is directly related to our dependent variable, the response rate. But we'll fix a specific time frame for the survey to be available, for instance, 1 month, and it will be the same for all treatment groups. So in the next slide, I'm just showing a brief overview of what we intend to do in this pilot phase. So kind of a research design. So the first phase that is more that intends to explore the feasibility on all the aspects related to the feasibility, and the second phase in which we intend to explore distribution strategies and how to best recruit participants to answer to the survey. The final stage is, we call it the strategic study, so it's the system development study. And in this stage, we intend to set up, so our final outcome, we intend to set up a permanent system for the EU plus countries that regularly collects data directly from asylum applicants and beneficiaries of international protection that are residents in reception centers. This system will allow us an established complementary tool to collect data. So the system will work as an established complementary tool to collect data on asylum migration and offer a standardized and comparable way of collecting data at EU level. The final goal is that the data is collected and transferable in real time and integrated into EASO databases, as I explained at the beginning, allowing the creation of real-time dashboards and the dissemination of results that we are collecting, and that will be accessible and available to all the EU member states and reception centers across EU countries. So our main goal, so this stage, the project aims for, in this stage, the project aims for a representative sample of asylum-related migrants, and the survey will be translated in several different languages, as well as already explained. So we will base the selection of language on the data that we have about the most common countries of origin in each reception center. The data collection intends to be a systematic and permanent process of collecting data. We will probably change some questions in the questionnaire time to time, etc., and we'll feed up our databases internally with data collected from the survey.
Sorry to interrupt you, Sarah. You need to be wrapping up if you can in a few seconds.
This is the last one. I'm sorry. And this is just to finalize that we also have more scientific goals, research goals with this project to produce scientific reports and to publish some papers in peer-reviewed journals in the field of migration. And of course, to share the knowledge that we gained and the experience we gained during the development and the implementation of this project. And sorry, and this is the final. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. For those of you who have joined later the webinar, we will be having all of the speakers present first, and then we will reserve the last 20-25 minutes for question and answers. We will stop sharing. Yep. And now I will be presenting Narayani La Sala Blanco, who is an assistant professor of political science at Arizona State University. And she will be now presenting the work that she's been doing in the context of the Syrian refugee panel study that she's been undertaking since 2017. Narayani, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the screen is all...
Yeah, but you need to click play from the start so that we see the whole screen and there.
Okay.
That's perfect, thanks.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm Narayani La Sala Blanco. I feel really honored to be here in this panel with, thank you, Laura and Marcelo, for the invitation, and thank you to Sarah. I think you raised some of the questions and issues that I thought about before embarking in this project, which started about 4 years ago. And this is really the first time I'm presenting the data. Chala Demidursen, who's here from ASU, is a graduate student that has been helping me at this stage of the project. So I'm really excited and looking forward to your comments and questions. But I just, I will start with the research agenda or the research question that has been guiding my work for a couple of years. And so I started my work in the US because I think that it's one of the democracy that has the oldest and the most varied relationship to immigration and integrating immigrants. And so the big overarching question that I have is whether all immigrants or only some are able to integrate into a liberal democratic polity. And so just for the purposes of this study, I thought about political integration as the adoption of core political attitudes that are consistent with the liberal Republican idea of citizenship. And they are liberal in the sense that they're not inherited, but that people join by choice and that respect the rule of law that protects the activities of everybody. But they're also Republican in that there should be a point where immigrants and their children attach some value to democratic institutions, and that value manifests into civic political engagement. And so as my background is in public opinion, so I build on the methods, the language, and the findings really of people who have been studying political socialization and how attitudes evolve and transform. And so the parting point for me is that as a public opinion scholar, is that I think that migrating to a different country is such a shock to the attitudes in general of anybody, but especially to the core political values, because the instinct, or what I've seen after multiple interviews and a lot of field work, is that people really are, in such a shock and trying to adjust that they become sort of what people like Sierra San Valentino and people who study political psychology say are the formative years. So they're very open and they're like a sponge absorbing what they think their role is in the host country. The question is, of course, for me, when is this period of intense learning and intense absorbing begin and end? So how long does it happen, and how much does previous political socialization matter when adjusting and adopting these values? And so my working hypothesis that began in the US is that all immigrants are willing. It's such a shock that really everybody is sort of willing and trying. They're very open. The ability is a combination of the geographical concentration and local institutions. So my working hypothesis is that people don't really migrate to a country, but they migrate to a very specific local environment. And that this local environment is made up of not just political institutions, but also religious institutions, social institutions, and the general public, and how they receive people who are coming in from another country. So I started looking at the local level micro-political environment because, as you can see in this map, this map shows you where people are settled to this day. People from different countries tend to concentrate in one area. So it's very difficult, for example, in the US to study the effect of local institutions when looking at, for example, Cuban American populations, because there's a very large sample if you do survey work in Florida, but for the rest of the country, you really don't get much. So this is what got this project started. How can you disentangle the characteristics of a group and their ability and willingness to integrate versus the local context? Because usually certain groups are concentrated in local context. So for example, in the case of Mexicans, which I focus on in the US, you couldn't know for a long time whether their lack of political participation happened because they were in places where the institutions really tried to prevent them from participating, or whether they themselves and their culture was such that they didn't understand democratic institutions, which was an argument that was made by many scholars, most famously by Sam Huntington. So this is what this is what I mean. So Hispanics have really fallen below the average of participating in electorally. So these are voting, the percentage of people who turned out to vote by group in the US. And so this gap between the red line, which is Hispanics, and the other two lines, which is blacks and whites, has been sort of a puzzle that has haunted every Latino politics scholars in the US. So my explanation, just to wrap up the background, is that this gap is explained away, and that's what I do in the book manuscript that I'm working on. This gap is explained away when you look at, or when you control for local institutions or geography. And so the main criticism of my work by the American experimentalists was that, well, maybe what if people that are more politically active, the Mexican Americans or the Mexican migrants that are more politically active, end up in places like Chicago, not randomly, but really because they like to be active, they feel that they can integrate more quickly. So when a few years ago, when I started as an assistant professor, and I had more time than I ever did, and also more resources, I sort of began thinking about expanding my idea to other national groups. And I had been working with UNHCR and UNICEF on a small survey project on vaccination. And so the colleagues that were in the UNHCR side were telling me that they had such a bottleneck because of the Syrian refugee crisis that they weren't taking preferences of the refugees in where to be resettled. They were really being resettled randomly on a first come, first served basis, especially for families. So I thought that it would be, well, given the size of this migration and the tragedy that people from all types of backgrounds, economic backgrounds, educational backgrounds, were being randomly resettled in multiple local contexts, I thought it was really worth exploring. And I was very fortunate that my colleagues from UNHCR and then later from the Red Cross in Europe were supportive of the project and allowed me to look at, well, they gave me some information and access to where Syrian refugees were being resettled. And so information of reception centers, but mostly of temporary housing in the different European cities. And so the main question guiding this project really follows from the previous one, which is, are there differences in the political integration process across national contexts, holding all these socioeconomic status of Syrian refugees, so single country of origin, but controlling for socioeconomic factors? Can we disentangle the effect of the local context of reception? Or is it really that we can only explain differences in opinion formation and in the future in civic skills and political participation at the country level? And so what this required obviously was panel data. So to follow refugees for a period of time. We're right now in the second wave. So we interviewed them when they arrived, or they had about between, a few days to up to about a year when they arrived. And then now we're re-interviewing them. So that's the main research question. And then of course, the second one, which follows, can we show whether experiences at the local level. So political institutions, social institutions, religious institutions, and the micro environment they create, can they explain variation in opinions and behavior? So can we say that in places where there's, for example, less hostility and where political parties are really recruiting and serving, well, first people who have been granted asylum, but then maybe who are, starting to participate in elections a few years from now, are people who live in these types of places more likely to become politically active than people who live in places where there's greater hostility, more discrimination, and where their interactions with political and state institutions have been negative. So just going back to the US for a moment, I did find that in the US, local political institutional environments that had low levels of political competitions and hostility against minorities did affect negatively the political socialization. So things like whether people understood basic facts about the host country political system, but also engagement, especially from people who had just arrived and weren't very political. Their children were negatively affected by this environment. So I'll just share with you very briefly the data collection and research design. It's a multi-city and multi-country research design, which means so each sample from each city is independent from the others. I tried to collect data from more than one city within one country in places where I thought that there would be these contrasts. It didn't all work out. But I have 2 or 3 countries where I have more than 2 cities. It necessitated a panel design because I needed to see how, well, I was very interested, and so were the people who, my co-investigators, including Professor Laura Morales, who has been there guiding us from the beginning, but also other folks that have been participating in the study. We wanted to see when exactly did this period of absorbing political values and absorbing a lot of information from the host country, when does it begin and when does it end? And then also, I was very adamant about collecting data from the native population, who was not just at the country level, but really in the local environment that they were in. Because what I found previously in the US is that in cities where we thought Mexican Americans were not participating very much because of their culture, it actually their lack of participation was a sign of political integration, because the political culture in some of those cities was that people didn't vote, people didn't care about politics, so they actually adjusted to their own environment. So it wasn't a Mexican American phenomenon of not really understanding democratic institutions, but it was really they absorbed the local culture where they arrived. So I also, in the study, I included an independent sample of the city. Then I'll show you very preliminary findings of who are they, the people that ended up in the sample. And then from the second wave, how are they? And so because the survey is conducted in Arabic and we have a lot of translations and back translations, I'm just gonna show you sort of a glimpse of the 2 countries that I thought from the first wave and the fieldwork we did were the most contrasting countries. So the 2 places where I thought refugees had the most negative experiences, and the place where refugees were reporting to have the most positive experiences. So Sweden would be the place where they had the most negative experience, not just in terms of their interactions with the state, but also housing, the health system, the school system for their children. And then Ireland being the place where they reported and where our team saw that they were the reception was a little gentler.
5 minutes, Narayani.
How many?
5 minutes.
Okay, so I will go straight to the data then. I think I've given enough background. So this is just a sample size. It's 845 Syrian households. And then in each city, which I won't show you the data of, but we have data for the city area. The field dates are between the first wave between 2017 and 2018. And then everything was conducted in person, but then COVID happened, as with Sarah. And so fortunately, we had collected phone numbers and emails of everybody. So we were able to do the second wave on the phone, but that affected us a little bit in terms of our response rate. This is just one of the teams in Sweden. We had a native Swedish team, and then Syrian students who were Syrian refugees who helped in the project. And this is sort of what the samples look like. There's a cluster around the reception center or the temporary housing, and then the green dots are just a native sample. Okay, so who are they very quickly? They are, a lot of them have households that have 3 or more family members. And then there's places like in Ireland and Sweden where, there's more families than in other places. I'm gonna skip the measures, but basically we have measures of political integration as I described and basic socioeconomic characteristics. So the male-female ratio is slanted towards males, not just because there's more males in general, but also because we had a situation where the husband wouldn't let the wife, even if she was the one randomly selected within the household, he wanted to be interviewed and didn't allow the wife. So take this with a grain of salt. It doesn't mean that there's mostly households where there's a single man, although there is in certain cities, but that's what we encountered. They're young, so there's a lot, most of the sample is below age 35. I didn't expect them to be so highly educated, and also coming from occupations that were, professional occupations like doctors, IT engineers, teachers. It was surprising to me that so many of the people we interviewed, were middle and upper middle class for the most part. And so I just wanted to show this again, just so that you get a sense of, yes, it's mostly families, although the person who we interviewed was the male head of household. And so how is it going? And I'll end with this. This is just a picture of what I find over and over again in multiple dimensions. People in Sweden, just from the preliminary sort of qualitative work, but also from the data, from the start, felt like they were mistreated. They were living in terrible conditions in very small housing units, and they were upset. And so 5 years later, you can see that there's a difference. The gray lines are Ireland. And so there is a big difference there's a significant difference between those who say that they love the country they're in the 2 cities in Sweden, so 56 and 52, this is Malmö and Stockholm, versus a combination of Irish cities, but it's mostly Dublin where they are, where there's also a housing crisis. So this is surprising. And just, this is my last slide, I promise, Laura. So all things considered, how satisfied are you with your life as a whole, living in the city, your present level of education, your present job, your accommodation, healthcare, personal health, and your social life? And so I just did a quick sort of mean and standard deviation, but as you can see across the board in Ireland, this is a 10-point scale where 0 means you are very unsatisfied and 10 is you're very satisfied. So across the board in Ireland, everybody is happier and yes, just happier in all of these dimensions. So I think that the question, the final question is not really whether all or some immigrants are willing and able to integrate, but really under what conditions are immigrants able to integrate. And I think that experiences in the host country or really the city play a role in shaping the types of citizens immigrants become. And so I'm not surprised between the Irish and the Swedish case, and I'll end with this. It was very interesting to me that in all cases, Swedish refugees were handled by other refugees, sort of like by older refugees that were from other nationalities, and it was like a perpetuating the abuse. Whereas although the Irish had less resources, they really made a point of having the entry be gentler and have Irish people receive and take care of the refugees with a translator. And so I think we just need to look really closely and do more field work to understand whether places and countries like Sweden, who look better on paper, really are doing the best they can to allow immigrants to be able to integrate. Sorry, I'm over time, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Narayani. A very interesting presentation, and we'll immediately leave the floor to Yulia Kozakova, senior researcher at the German Institute for Employment Research, who will be presenting results around the integration of refugees in Germany based on the IAB-BAMF SOEP survey of refugees. Yulia, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me here. I'm really very happy to learn so much about surveys conducted in other countries and cross-nationally. So I think that it's very valuable, all this data. So today I would like to present you the data from the EAB-BAMF survey of refugees and some of the results, because we have a huge amount of different results, but I will try to keep it very, very quick. So, and to my person, beyond of being a senior researcher at the Institute for Employment Research in Germany, I also coordinate this study at the EAB. Oh, it doesn't click. Okay, so just to start with, I would like to maybe remind you that Germany emerged as a main destination for refugees among the high-income countries in 2015 and in the following years. And roughly 1.6 million asylum applications have been logged there between 2015 and 2018. Just to comparison, this amounted to 3.9 million asylum applications in the EU28. And the total asylum seekers and refugee population numbered to 1.4 million in 2017 in Germany. And again, to compare with, it amounted to 3 million in the European Union in EU28, and to 5 million in all high-income countries. So as you can see, the share is really impressive, but compared to the global population of concern, it is still moderate. So for example, the German share makes only 2% of the global population of concern in 2018, and it made 6% of 23 million of the population of concern living abroad. Why doesn't it work? So yeah, it jumps, I'm sorry. Okay, and the lion's share of asylum seekers to Germany have arrived from 5 countries of origin. So it is Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Eritrea, and Iran. And although migration decisions are very kind of a mixture of political, social, and economic and other motives, the evidence from the objective and subjective data suggests that more than 80% arrived for political reasons in Germany, and their arrival was affected by war, persecution, or other forms of violence. And this is reflected in the approval rates in Germany. So the lion's share, or the greatest share, are already have approved asylum applications, meaning that they will stay in Germany for some time, even for a longer time. And this created unprecedented challenge for integration, which motivated actually this project and this creation of this data. Okay, so to inform the politics and to enable scientific research, there was created the EABEBA Subsurvey of Refugees in Germany was created by 3 involved institutes. So it is EAB, Research Center of BAMF, which is the Federal Office of Migration and Refugees in Germany, and socioeconomic panel, German socioeconomic panel at the JIW in Berlin. So this is a couple of words about the data. It is a longitudinal household data with different refreshment samples. So it was launched in 2016, and in the meanwhile, we have data for more than 8,000 of adult refugees and asylum seekers, plus more than 5,500 children. The data was sampled from Central Foreigner Register and is correspondingly representative for refugees and asylum seekers arriving between 2013 and 2016, so independent on their status in the asylum procedure. We follow their retrospective biographical perspective, so it means that we survey a lot of information on personal, biographical, and household and family. We have different questionnaires. So we have personal, biographical, then a household questionnaire and family questionnaire, and we also have a questionnaire for interviewers, so to assess the whole interview situation. The data is integrated in socioeconomic panel, which allows comparative design. So it allows comparative analysis with natives and other immigrants in Germany, and also the record linkage with social security data. So with the register data allows a long time analysis of the long time integration process. Okay, the data or the interviews were provided in the, there were CAPI interviews, so it is computer assisted personal interviews in 7 languages. And if needed, there was support of translators. So we had the following languages: it's Arabic, English, Farsi, Dari, German, Kurmanji, Pashto, and Urdu. And to enable surveying of illiterate individuals, we also included some auditive instruments. And the data covers a lot of topics. So our first questionnaire included roughly 450 questions. And we have biographical information for migration, employment, and education, biography before migration or before arrival to Germany. And after arrival to Germany, we survey refugee migration motives, migration process, also a lot of information on human capital or behavioral characteristics, values, attitudes, and so on. So there is also possibility to analyze labor market integration in Germany, societal integration, health status, changes in terms of health and well-being, and so on. And we also ensure quality control of the data by analyzing or identifying interviewer falsification. We were quite successful in that. We can turn to that later on if needed. What we also do, we implement novel instruments. So there are several which I wanted to highlight. One is the so-called CAMSIS tool developed in cooperation with EASO. So it allows appropriate identification or measurement of the foreign degrees. We also introduce vignettes and different experiments. And since COVID-19, we're also to analyze the consequences of COVID-19 pandemic. We have additional corona surveys and also just recently antigen tests. So it is really very rich data, and for now we have, I think, 4 waves which are currently available, and now the data or the survey starts its 6th wave. So here are some key results from the data. Sorry. First, I would like to start with demographic composition. So, as I told, data is representative, and what we see is that 2/3 of adult refugees arrived from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Eritrea, and Iran. And this is very young population, so it is a similar result which was identified by previous speaker. It is more male than female, but compared to this graph shows just the reflection of the share of refugees in the German population, just for comparison, and to show the possibilities of integration of the data in the national representative survey and comparison. The next slide shows some information on traumatic experience and health outcomes. So we asked about refugee trip or the arrival process, and among individuals who answered to these sensitive questions, we found out that 27% of refugees experienced betrayal, other 23%, for example, experienced imprisonment, but you also see that 15% experienced shipwrecking. These traumatic experiences are reflected in the health status of refugees. So what you can see here is a comparison of the health status of refugees and population average in Germany by age and gender. And here we surveyed a lot of questions which allowed us to calculate the specific scales. So one is physical well-being, another is, for example, mental well-being scales, and the third one is depressive symptoms. And what we learned from this data is that on average, refugees have a better physical health status, while these differences disappear when we account for age differences. In turn, the data shows that refugees have a worse mental well-being, and this is not explained away when we control for age. And additional result was that women in older groups in particular have a much worse health status than men and the population in Germany. Here also one interesting result or slide on values. So we asked about support for democratic and other values among refugees, and we compared the shares with citizens in Germany based on the World Values Service. And generally what we see here is that support of democratic values among, there is a question, support of democratic values among refugees is very high and very similar to German population, while when we compare to the population in origin countries, the support of democratic values in the origin countries is much lower. When we look on the gender values, I would invite you to look here in this part of the diagram. We observe that the gender or non-traditional egalitarian gender values are quite pronounced and very similar to the German population, while societal values are a little bit different. So, for example, here only 8% of refugees compared to 32% of Germans support abortion, and these differences are similar for other values. We also learned that in terms of human capital, the educational levels are highly polarized. So only 20% possess no education level below primary education, but on the other hand, 11% obtained university or similar degrees. Still, compared to the origin countries, the selection on human capital is much pronounced. So the share of individuals with tertiary degrees among those who arrived to Germany is much higher than in the countries of origin. For labor market experience, the results are similar as to the results from the by previous speaker. Refugees possess pronounced labor market experience, and many of them, well, very small amount of them, worked in semi or unskilled tasks. In regard to the integration process or the role of language and job training programs in Germany. So here is just one result. The participation in language training in 2017, I think, by gender and childcare support. And what we've learned here is that the gender differences are pronounced a lot, and particularly among those with children and those without external childcare opportunities. So this is a challenge, integration challenge, and although this gender differences reduced a little bit over time, they're still quite pronounced. And the last slide with results refers to labor market integration process. So what we learn here is that when we look on the average 5 years after arriving to Germany, roughly we can say half of the refugee or adult refugee population have found their job, so they are employed. However, these differences, there are pronounced gender differences, and we observe that women are much less integrated than men. So 5 years after arrival, 60% of men are employed, but this amounts to less than half of that for women. Okay, our research output, here's a little bit advertisement. So if you look on the Google Scholar, it is a very popular survey. It achieved almost 1,000 hits. Based on this survey, there are already 40 publications in peer-reviewed international journals in really interdisciplinary published in different outlets. And we have more than 150 other research outputs, and this is also very relevant data for policy research. And data access, so for those who might be interested in that, currently there are 4 waves available for analysis, and to access this data, you just need to go via socioeconomic panel, the research center, or the ERB, so FDZ ERB. Yeah, so I'm happy to stop, or not. I could talk longer now about this data, but I have to stop here, and I'm available for any questions.
So thank you very much, Julia, for those very interesting pieces of information about the survey and the data analysis result. It's a very useful introduction, and I think we have three very rich and insightful presentation. So now we have 10-15 minutes for questions and answers. And because it's a small group in the audience, I would invite anyone with questions to raise their hand, and they can actually, if they want to, switch their cameras on and ask the questions via the normal microphone, because we are in a meeting mode rather than a webinar mode, so everyone can actually switch on their cameras and speak. So are there any questions? No?
May we also ask questions?
Of course, the panel members can also ask questions to each other. So Narayani, please go ahead and get it started.
So Julia, unfortunately, I was unable to present the German data, but it seems to me that it's the place where there's most, that's favoring my hypothesis, there's the most variation at the local level. And so if you could talk a little bit about the data that you've seen. So the cities in my sample are Berlin, Dresden, and Munich. And it almost looks like the Syrians would be in 3 different countries, because the ones in Berlin seem the happiest. They really feel like they're in a multicultural haven. They're interacting with other people, and the Munich people seem to be upset and depressed. And the Dresden folks, we have a lot of families, and it was surprising to me, because it was East, that they also seem to be integrating quite well.
Mm-hmm.
So a very selfish question, I'm sorry.
Very nice question. Thank you. So I'm not doing a kind of federal state level analysis, or at least descriptive analysis, and I don't know whether your data, I missed this point, to which extent it is representative for each city. I mean, with our data, you can definitely try to look for these specific cities, because the data is regionally representative. But I can share, I can imagine that what you find is could be the case, because we know that in Germany the differences regionally are very pronounced, and it is not only the case for refugees. We even know that East-West Germany are kind of very different worlds in terms of acceptance of immigrants, refugees, in terms of, I don't know, values and so on. So I believe that what you see is also true. I mean, the variation, regional variation, is really big. We have differences in terms of asylum application and recognition rates. We have differences in terms of integration measures. So there is really a lot in terms of policies and how different they are. And what else is, of course, important? Germany, there is this new law that refugees are bound to their first place of residence. So after receiving protection, they are bound to stay in the federal state of assignment for the next 3 years. And in some federal states, this is even the case for locality, for the city or municipality. So, and then you can imagine, if you are assigned to Berlin and you have to stay there, you have plenty of opportunities. You have a network of people, you have ethnic communities, you have job opportunities. While this could be very different in, I don't know, Dresden, and also even if you go into rural area, the situation could be even worse, also in terms of well-being and happiness and integration.
Thank you very much, both for your questions and answers. Other questions from the audience? Yes, Margareta, please go ahead.
Hi to everyone. Thank you for great 3 presentations. I really enjoyed it. I have a question for Sarah. Well, it's in line with what Julia just said. I'm puzzled about sampling frame of the SAM study, because I don't know what the sampling frame is. Is it the EU plus as a whole, or are the countries themselves which are in EU? And this could induce some possible issues in representativeness of the sample, because I don't know, on a Croatian example, we have very, very high fluctuation of the number of asylum seekers and refugees, and it's pretty hard to track them. Once they have their status approved, they often move to another country. So what is the sample? What are the data representative of?
So thank you for your question and for your interest. So regarding the sampling frame, it's different. So it varies depending on the stage, but I think you are referring to the last stage, so the final outcome of the project. So in the system development stage, we envision to have a representative sample from each country, so from EU plus countries as a whole, but it's going to be representative for each EU country. So it's a very ambitious goal. We are aware of that, and it's very possible that we will not be able to do that. For instance, maybe in the first years of the system being working. We are also totally aware of the different flows and the fluctuation of the numbers. So yes, of course, we're going to base our sampling frame on the most recent numbers that we have access. So we are, let's say, lucky because we have a system that collects data in these countries. So we have access to the data for planning the sampling frame. But of course, it's a very ambitious goal, and also we envision this as a system that is going to be produced in a long time. So we hope to, with time, improve it and be able to include all countries. But it's possible that in the beginning, we'll not be able to include all countries, or all countries will not be willing to allow us to conduct a survey in the reception centers, being because they have a really high flow of asylum migrants arriving, or even the contrary, because they have a very low number of people in their reception centers, and they believe it's not worth to go there and conduct a survey. So yeah, this, I think I answered your question, I hope.
Other questions from the audience?
I would like to ask a question.
Sure, go ahead.
So it's to Nariani, I'm saying it right. I would like to hear a little bit more about how you conducted the field work for that project. So more, let's say, more practicalities of the field work, more like how did you contact these Syrian refugees in the first place, and how was I think it was face-to-face interviews, right? But how were they performed so practically, and if it's possible?
It was quite the experience, Sarah. So I saw that you had like a test pilot, and that's what we did for a summer. And so the formula that really worked for us was we would present the letter of support that we got from UNHCR and then Red Cross. We had already selected the places, so it was temporary housing. And I was very lucky that the student, well, lucky, and then Laura and other people who had worked in similar surveys connected me to the local university. And so in the local universities, I identified students who were also Syrian refugees. And so that worked very well because they, you know, on our end, we taught them the equivalent of one semester survey research methods course as a training. So it was an internship. So they were pretty happy, both the faculty and the students. And then the wonderful thing, and I think, you know, if this is helpful for your study too, refugees were very keen on helping the students the local students, so the local youth. So what we would do is we would go to the manager of the center or the camp or the housing they were in, and we would show the letter of support. And then we would say, can we, depending on how many refugees, because sometimes there were only 3 or 4, and then we would try to interview everybody. But in some there were, like in Sweden, there were 60 families in one building, and they were all Syrian refugees that had arrived within a week. So then we would randomly select the families, and the students would make the approach. They would, you know, go through the script of how, you know, this is what we're doing. Do you want to participate? And then first we had an incentive that was a cash incentive, and that was insulting to people. They didn't want the money. So what the students came up with, which was a wonderful idea, was a meal. So who participated, we would hire a local either restaurant or caterer. So whoever participated, they would give us like a really nice menu of a sandwich or something like that, and they could share it with other people who didn't participate in the study. And so we had a meal for participants, and that's how we did it. And then we would, the IRB required us to have like so that they would have privacy when answering the interview. And I think that's maybe why so many husbands didn't allow the wives, even though we had female interviewers, they wanted, yes, so they wanted to be the ones answering the questions for the family. But that's that's basically it. It was the students and the meal. And some people refused. They were just coming in and they didn't feel like answering, but we had a pretty good response rate, and I attribute that to the students. And we actually had one student who was like a celebrity because he worked for the Red Cross and had a Facebook page and followers. And he's the one that convinced a lot of the refugees to enlist in the study and give us information.
So you involved organizations working in the field of asylum, and also use some incentives.
Yes, but it was mostly the universities, the local universities that provided the students, and then we just showed the camp manager the letter of support.
If I can interject here, Narayani, if I recall correctly, at some point you actually tried to design a study that was not very dissimilar to what EASO is trying to do through an online survey, but using the mobile phones, and you had to discard that. And maybe that would be interesting experience, a failure experience, perhaps to EASO, because I remember that you told me that they were very reluctant to be interviewed using the phones and push online surveys, right?
We experimented with giving them a phone, because that's how I have worked in the US with hard to reach population, where you give them the phone and you pay for the phone service. And they didn't like that. They thought we had more success when we dropped the phone idea. Then we also designed an app that would give them information, and they thought this, especially the Syrians, a lot of them are into IT and things, so they thought we were tracking them and following them. So it had to be a very we had to sort of tone down the technology and then just use sort of the personal connection of the students.
Yes, that is
Julia?
the, sorry.
No, sorry. I thought that Julia had the hand raised there, but Sarah, go ahead. You wanted to say something.
Yes, that is mainly one of our concerns, having response rates, so having them participating in the survey by their own means. It's nice to hear your experience.
I think there might be something regarding just Syrians, like their culture and their, awareness and where they were coming from, like, from a political situation, they felt very persecuted and they felt like the regime had all their information and all of that. So maybe it's just like you have to find ways for different country of origins to get them interested in the study.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Julia?
I wanted to continue this discussion a little bit because I mean we also have a lot of experience with this interviewing process, and what we did, we didn't had students, of course, but the professional interviewers. It was interviewing was conducted by Kantar Public. Yes, and now Infos. So. And what we did, we recruited interviews from the same origin countries. So I think the lion's share of our interviewers were from the origin countries of refugees. So which increased their cultural understanding, interpretation, and so on of the whole process. What we've learned is, I mean, the response rate in the first interview was actually very high in our study. Maybe it was related to the fact that, I mean, most of refugees, they don't have this experience with surveying because it is not often the kind of usual case in their countries of origin. And maybe many of them thought it is a must, that they must participate, and that's why there was this very high response rate at the beginning, and this dropped by the second interview. So in the second wave, I think like 30% or similar dropped out. That's why we also had this refreshment sample. But after that, it was very high panel stability. So you have this drop after the first interview. I mean, there could be different reasons. This could be kind of they changed their mind and they decided not to participate anymore because they understood it will not affect their asylum process or whatever. Or their people just were rejected in their asylum process and were returned home. So there are a lot of potential reasons. But it's just kind of, I wanted to share a little bit experience what we had with this.
Thank you, Julia. Any other questions, comments from the audience? No, I don't see any hands. Okay, then I'll abuse a little bit my position to ask some questions to all of you. To Sarah, I was actually quite curious about your thoughts around how realistic your pilot study with Norway, France, and Belgium, when eventually you have the chance to launch it, would be, if I understand correctly, they are probably the countries that have been more likely or kind of more receptive, so to say, to your request of participating in that stage of the overall kind of large-scale project, and whether it might have been a good idea to try to also test what it would mean to try to launch the process with a more reluctant, even if perhaps not the most reluctant, but at least a more reluctant country to try to have a realistic sense of what will be the timing, what will be the challenges in relation to the implementation of the project in the kind of the large scale sense. For Julia, I had a question that relates to, well, obviously this panel study is fabulous, and we would all want to have such a study everywhere in Europe, but unfortunately that's not the case. But I was particularly interested in learning a little bit more about the coverage of all legal statuses that you mentioned. And I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about how exactly do you manage to assure that that's actually the case, and particularly there's a number, obviously, of asylum seekers that will eventually get their applications rejected, and that either leave the country or become in an unauthorized status vis-a-vis their stay in the country. And I was wondering, on the one hand, whether your initial sample ever included such individuals, or it is the case that they can become in such a situation during the various waves of the panel, and how do you handle the situation about their the sensitivity of their participation, and also vis-a-vis the federal government and the authorities. So that was something that interested me in particular. And finally, for Narayani, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about whether there was any, in your view, relation between response rates and how hostile or welcoming the locations were in terms of the local context, because obviously your design has been carefully thought through to try to ensure that, precisely because this randomized allocation of Syrian refugees across Europe, and to a certain extent as well within cities, within countries, there wouldn't be a bias in terms of that aspect of self-selection. But you have the risk of getting other forms of self-selection relating to response rates if they are a function, to a certain extent, of how hostile or how welcoming the cities themselves and the reception centers are as well. And what's your sense? I know that you've been actually personally on the field, which is not something that is so usual, that the principal investigator is traveling around all of these cities with a team of interviewers. So what were your perceptions of how much that is a risk, and whether you had any mitigating measures to try to alleviate any such possible biases? Thanks. Sarah, do you want to go first?
Okay, so thank you for the question. And yes, so our the first project, let's say, planned as well some face-to-face interviews with professional interviewers that were native in the country of origin from the respondents, the same country of origin. And we conducted a preliminary study to try to address the different member states' willingness to participate in the survey with these face-to-face interviews. And we had 6 member states answering they were interested in having the survey running in the reception centers, and they were willing to support us. And then from these, 3 were randomly selected, and the other were state as advisory countries for the survey, and following the process as well. And yes, this was a convenience sample, of course. However, inside this selection, we were going to survey a representative sample inside each of these countries. And so we had access through the reception centers to the population data, also regarding nationalities and age, gender, sex, and other characteristics that we consider relevant. And so we planned the sampling frame. However, we were not able to move forward with this because of COVID, as explained. And I don't think that we are going back to this idea of the face-to-face interviews, unless, of course, something goes really bad with our online survey collection.
But still, sorry, the recruitment for the online part will require some face-to-face interaction, or you're not expecting to have any face-to-face interaction even for the recruitment process? Will all be 100% electronic?
So we expect to have some face-to-face interaction with reception centers and with staff working in reception centers that will support us displaying posters, flyers. If possible, we are planning an online landing page that can pop up from when they access Wi-Fi in their reception center. So it could work like an online flyer. And so, yes, so, sorry, I got a little lost, but so we are not really planning to, so the face-to-face interaction probably is going to be this one. And I'm referring now to the final stage of the project, because in the pilot project, we will probably have some kind of face-to-face interaction when we're going to test distribution strategies and involve community leaders, etc. Also distributing the survey and contact other organizations working in the field of asylum, etc. So we also plan to have it some face-to-face interaction. But as we intend this to be a system that is going to be permanently collecting data, our main goal is that this goes the most possibly online and be self-monitored and administered. Yes, but of course we still have a long way to go.
Thank you. Julia?
Yep, thank you. So I'm just checking, I was checking the data. Yes, we of course cover all possible legal statuses. So the sampling frame was done via the central, what is the name? Register of Foreigners. So this is a big system where you have all people registered, and we took individuals who arrived or were registered and arrived between January 2013 and I think December 2016, and were registered by the before interview time point in this kind of the whole system, and then took the random sample of, I think it was like 10,000 individuals, and then proceed with questionnaire. But what we definitely did, we oversampled the countries of origin with a high probability of stay, while those, you know, who are more likely to be rejected were not of primary interest. Still, via the via specific design and this probability weights and application of weights in general, you can ensure representativeness of the data. And just checking the results, what we published in the first year or so, in 2016, in our data, only 46% had approved status, while others were either rejected or still in the asylum process. And we, of course, asked in more details. So it is not only approved or rejected, it is really the status. So it is subsidiary protection, or it is this political asylum, which is very specific to Germany, or refugee status as defined by Geneva Convention, and so on. So we do have kind of all of that information, what you asked. And the second question was about sensitivity, right? Laura, the second question was about sensitivity, or how we ensured that people...
Yes, those that actually became in this unauthorized situation, whether you had a sort of any extra precautions in terms of the sensitivity of their data and the protection of their data in terms of access for analysis. So an extra check
I mean,
to ensure that anonymization is so absolutely robust that nobody could actually identify them.
Yeah, the data, like at the beginning, we in general, we had this invitation letter where it was ensured that this survey data will never affect their chances in the asylum process. So it was for us the most important to avoid any social desirability or anything in this way. And in terms of asylum procedure, we surveyed this data. So we, I mean, we had this sample frame, but then we didn't link the registered data of the Federal Ministry for Refugees and Immigrants with the survey data. We asked about the asylum process. So we asked whether people already have been registered, whether they applied for asylum, whether they when and whether they received the results and so on. And then we asked about the status additionally. So this is the survey data, and it has nothing to do with the official data, what you could access via linking this with the registered data. It's a future music, actually. We are planning to link it, but for data protection, I mean, of course, the data the data protection rules ensure that the anonymization and access of the data for research or policy goals. Yeah, whether I answered your question?
Yeah, you did. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Narayani?
It is very brief, Laura. So I had a very similar experience to what Julia was saying. So I think even if you say this, this will not affect your asylum or refugee status, people just arrived and the camp manager allowed these students, even though they're Syrian students, I think they were, afraid because the response rate was 80 to 95% everywhere. So for the first wave. And then for the second wave, there's the big drop, and most definitely in the places where people seemed the happiest, we had the highest response rate. And in places like Munich and Stockholm, it was like pulling teeth. I almost had to go to therapy. It was very hard to get the second wave. And the students tried so many times. We went beyond the 10th contact. And I think the only thing that I trust the data, because I think that the link between the student and the person was what prevented us from having a bigger drop. But definitely the people that were the most unhappy were the hardest to survey again. So I don't know how, as you know, we're trying to move to a professional survey company, how you would deal with that bias, because definitely in every single country, in every single city, the ones that are the most unhappy are the ones that are the most unwilling to answer the future waves.
Okay, at least it's a bias that if we know that it's there, it can be statistically somehow controlled for, but it's important to be aware. And then perhaps for future field work, such as the one that it's been planned by EASO, it might be really important to establish a protocol of data collection about the non-responses and the impressions that at least the polling company and those in the field have in relation to this link between satisfaction with reception and with the living conditions and and response rate, so that can be borne in mind. I think Julia is raising perhaps her finger. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just a small remark here. I'm not sure that this is only the problem for refugees. Maybe kind of advice would be to check other representative national service and check whether this is an issue also for other data. And then if yes, just to check how they deal with it. I mean, you need to calculate this probability of participation and then reweight basically the data. Yeah.
That's helpful, thank you.
Good. Any other last minute questions from the audience? No? Then join me in thanking Sara Enriquez, Narayani La Sala Blanco, and Julia Kosiakova for their presentations, their participation in this, which is our last webinar before the summer. I want to sincerely thank Marcello Caramia and Elena Brosetti, who have worked really very hard throughout the whole term to ensure that despite the lockdown and the sort of remote conditions, we could still have this policy dialogue seminars, which at least from my perspective have been really illuminating and helpful in trying to contribute to the mutual learning between the members of the Ethmigsurveydata cost action and also external speakers from a number of European agencies and international organizations that are working on the field with survey data on ethnic and migrant minorities. So thank you very much again, and I hope that all of you will have a great summer and that we will see you very soon again after this summer. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.